Well, good Tuesday morning, everybody. It is March 30th, and it's a bit different weather today than yesterday. If you don't like the weather today, just wait a day. The wind's a little less, but the temperature's much cooler. I preferred the temperature yesterday, but I didn't like the wind. And I do apologize, but since the weather is changing, I have a terrible, terrible sinus headache today. It's one of those days where I'm going to be suffering due to the changing weather, so bear with me. Yesterday, we took up the entirety of chapter 7, so we had a big one yesterday. Talked about Stephen and all of that, and then at the end, we've got Stephen being stoned and Saul, who will become Paul, there witnessing it and giving his approval even to that a vicious act. I don't think I mentioned it, but as far as we know, Stephen is the very first or the original Christian martyr. He is the first one to be martyred in the name of Christ, as far as we are aware. That's what Scripture tells us. So that is where we left off yesterday. Today we're just going to take a tiny little bite. We're going to start chapter 8, but we're only going to, excuse me, we're only going to deal with the first 4 verses of chapter 8. After such a big chunk yesterday, we need a bit of a break, a little lighter load today. But this is an important bit of verses as well. So we're going to start chapter 8, verses 1 through 4, and the persecution of the church begins. That day, a severe persecution began against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout the countryside of Judea and Samaria. Devout men buried Stephen and made loud lamentation over him. But Saul was ravaging the church by entering house after house, dragging off both men and women. He committed them to prison. Now those who were scattered went from place to place, proclaiming the word. Okay. So this is oftentimes at the beginning of the persecution of the Christian church. Well, the Christian church still doesn't exist. This is more of Judaism trying to root out what they believe to be a heretical sect, if you will. We don't like to hear that, but that's more along the lines of what the Jewish nation would have been viewing this as. Christianity would have been the newest sect. Again, I've mentioned many times, at the time of Jesus, there was at least 3 dozen sects of Judaism with various different, some of them weren't much different one from another, but there were some that were Sadducees to the Pharisees, for example, or the Essenes. Quite a bit of difference between those 3. And then you had smaller sects between them. And Christianity would have been the newest guy on the block. And they are trying to be persecuted. Saul at that time, is out there trying to purify. He's a Pharisee. He believes in staying with the law. He wants the purity, that pure thought. But the interesting part about these 4 verses is the first verse and the last verse that we looked at, really, because we're well aware of, in number 2, before we get to that, the second verse, devout men buried Stephen and made loud lamentation over him. We had the professional mourners in those days, okay? Remember that. They're whining and crying and wailing over the dead. But first verse and last verse, 1 and 4, the severe persecution began against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout the countryside of Judea and Samaria. And then verse 4, now those who were scattered went from place to place proclaiming the word. The interesting thing is here is the initial persecution of the church is what forced the disciples that were in Jerusalem out into the countryside, and from there they go further. And then, of course, when Paul converts, then it goes even further yet. But what they think they're doing to root them out actually forces it to go out and spread the word. So God, what you intended for evil, God intended for good. God can make good out of even the worst situation. God will find the blessing in the curse, if you will. And so that's what's going on. They are heading out and they're spreading the word to these others. They're going to the other synagogues and they're spreading the word in the other synagogues where the priests and such aren't there so much to persecute them. But remember, it's still a Jewish sect. And in fact, it remains as such for quite a long time. We know that James the Just, the brother of Jesus, who I believe is really the main force of the early church, that's my opinion. James remains in the temple. preaching there up until the year 67 when he's martyred by the then high priest, who was a grandson of Ananias. Comes into power while there's a governor. There's a change in the governors of Judea, and while there's no governor actually there, the high priest comes in and has James martyred, has him thrown from the top of the temple, and then when he doesn't die, they beat him with a fuller's club. Kind of a rough crowd, eh? So they kill James that way. But there's still enough of a connection there that when the new governor gets there, before he even gets there, letters have been sent to him by the Pharisees complaining about this. And so they rally to the aid of James. And when the new governor gets there, that high priest, and I forget his name, I should go look that up. That high priest is deposed, and he has a very short tenure as high priest. And the Roman governor puts somebody else in as high priest, the new governor. So that is what's going on there. But the bottom line is that no matter what they thought they were going to accomplish, all they ended up accomplishing was spreading the word. And that's what we have to look at. We may be feeling persecuted now, but out of this persecution, God intends some good. We don't know what it is. Perhaps I'm sure at that time they didn't see the good in that. They wanted to stay there together and fellowship and all of that, but now they're scattering, and they're taking the message of Christ with them. So let's do that today. Take the message of Christ with you wherever you go. Have a very blessed day, and as I always say, be a blessing to someone today. And we will see you in the morning. Don't forget all of the things coming up this week. Thursday night, 7 o'clock, Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, 3 o'clock, cross raising, and all of the things going on Easter morning with the sunrise service. The breakfast Easter egg hunt is at 9 for the kiddies. Bring your kids, grandkids, neighbor kids, whatever kids on up for Easter egg hunt, and then worship at 10. See you all around this week. Lots of times, hopefully see you this week. Have a blessed one. Bye-bye.